Honey, can you replay to this for me? My eyes aren't what they used to be.
I found out by accident, which somehow made it all the more painful. We were in the car, and my wife asked me to reply to a quick message for her while she was driving. It was a normal request, something we'd done 100 times before. But this time was different. Her phone unlocked, and right there on the screen was a conversation she'd clearly forgotten to hide. I just froze. The words weren't meant for me, but there they were, burning into my memory. Time seemed to slow down as I stared at the screen, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. The silence in the car became heavy. She noticed it first. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice laced with a hint of concern. I couldn't bring myself to say anything. I just handed the phone back to her, my own hands feeling like lead. She glanced at the screen, and a nervous laugh escaped her lips. "Oh, that," she said, waving it off. "It's just a silly misunderstanding, nothing to worry about." I nodded, my throat too tight to speak, even as I felt my hands begin to shake. I didn't want to cause a scene in the car, so I just looked out the window and let the world blur past. That night was the longest of my life. Sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, those messages replayed in my head, a cruel and endless loop of betrayal. I kept asking myself the same questions over and over. How long has this been going on? Who is he? How could I have been so blind? The urge to wake her up, to confront her, to scream and demand answers was overwhelming, but something held me back. An instinct for self-preservation, maybe. I realized that a heated confrontation would only lead to more lies and denials. I didn't want a messy fight. I wanted the unvarnished truth. And so, in the quiet darkness of that sleepless night, I made a decision. I would not react. I would observe. The weeks that followed were a masterclass in quiet investigation. My wife, believing I had accepted her flimsy excuse, became careless. She thought my silence was ignorance, that my calm was a sign of naivety, but her assumption was my advantage. It gave me the clarity I desperately needed. I started paying attention to everything. I became a quiet, attentive, and patient observer in my own home. I noted the late-night work emergencies, the sudden girls' nights out with friends I'd never heard of, the way she guarded her phone like it was a state secret. Her carelessness made my task easier than I could have imagined. I found messages she forgot to delete, saved them securely. I started a private log, noting dates, times, excuses, and the glaring contradictions in her stories. It was like putting together a puzzle, and with each piece I found, the picture became clearer and more devastating. The most painful part wasn't the emotional chaos of a passionate affair. No, this was different, this was calculated. It was routine. It was a second life she was living, methodically and without any apparent guilt. That cold, systematic deception hurt far more than any impulsive mistake ever could. Once I had a clear picture of the situation, I knew I couldn't handle this alone. The betrayal was too deep, the legal implications too complex. I quietly contacted a lawyer who specialized in family law. His advice was direct and crucial. Stay calm, gather evidence, and do not engage in arguments. He told me that my composure would be my greatest asset. So I stopped arguing, completely. When she would try to pick a fight over something small, I would simply agree or walk away. The emotional energy I would have once spent on pointless squabbles, I now channeled into preparing for my future. My sudden lack of engagement didn't go unnoticed. She started complaining that I'd become distant and cold. "What's wrong with you?" she'd ask, frustrated. "You never want to talk anymore." I'd just nod and say I was tired from work, and in a way it was true. I was tired. I was exhausted from living a lie, from pretending that our life was normal when I knew it was a carefully constructed facade. While she saw distance, I was actually building a bridge to my own freedom, one quiet step at a time. I was preparing myself to leave this marriage cleanly and with my dignity intact. As she felt her control over the situation slipping, she panicked. One evening, she suggested we go to marriage counseling. It was a strategic move, an attempt to regain the upper hand. But it was too little, too late. The time for counseling had passed the moment I saw those messages. I declined her offer politely, without giving a reason. My calm refusal seemed to unnerve her more than an angry outburst would have. She was used to emotional reactions she could manipulate. My quiet resolve was something she didn't know how to handle. A few nights later, she made her next move. She sat me down and confessed, but only partially. She gave me a watered-down, carefully edited version of the truth, admitting to an emotional connection but denying anything more. She cried, she apologized, she painted herself as a victim of circumstance. It was a performance designed to test the waters and see how much I knew. She hoped a little bit of honesty would be enough to reset our relationship, to earn my forgiveness and put everything back to normal. She didn't realize that her partial confession was a confirmation of everything I already knew, and then some. I listened to her entire story without interrupting once. I let her finish, let the silence hang in the air after her final, tearful apology. When she was done, she looked at me with hopeful eyes and asked, "So, can you forgive me?" I took a deep breath and chose my words carefully. "I think forgiveness and reconciliation are two very different things," I told her. That was not the answer she was expecting. Her expression shifted instantly from feigned guilt to genuine fear. The mask fell away. "What does that mean?" she demanded. I looked at her directly and said, "It means I've already spoken to a lawyer." The color drained from her face. The controlled, remorseful tears turned into uncontrollable, panicked sobs. In that moment, she wasn't crying for our marriage. She was crying for herself. My calmness seemed to amplify her hysteria. She had expected shouting, anger, a dramatic scene. My quiet, measured response was a reality she was not prepared for. The days that followed were a chaotic spiral for her. She swung wildly between panic, anger, and denial. One moment she'd be begging me to stay, the next she'd be screaming that I was cruel and heartless for not forgiving her. Through it all, I remained focused on logistics, not emotions. I talked about separating finances, about who would stay in the house, about the practical steps of dissolving a partnership. That stark contrast between her emotional turmoil and my practical focus completely overwhelmed her. She accused me of being cold and unfeeling. I simply replied, "Clarity often feels cold to those who have relied on confusion." Her erratic behavior started to worry our mutual friends. They reached out to me asking if everything was okay. I decided to be honest. I told them the truth, simply and without embellishment. I didn't try to paint her as a villain or myself as a martyr. I just laid out the facts. And quietly, support began to arrive.